When it comes to delivering value, there may be no better spokespeople than Robin Standefer and Stephen Alesch of Roman & Williams. If you haven't experienced their work in person, you've seen it on Instagram, whether it's the Ace Hotel, the Standard High Line, the Metropolitan Museum of Art's British Galleries, or their own shop, Guild, and restaurant La Mercerie. They're big believers that the creative process should have a sense of authorship, and that you should never give up on the fundamental principles that give you purpose, even if you have to fight for them to make dollars and cents. I'm really excited to throw this one to my colleague, Business of Home's editor-in-chief, Caitlin Peterson, who's downtown with Stephen and Robin at Roman & Williams Guild. Take it away, Caitlin.
Thank you, Dennis, and it's so great to be here with you guys. Thank you so much for having us. We're going to talk a lot today about purpose and values, and I know that's a really important piece that underpins all of your business. But I think to start, you were working together in set design before launching Roman & Williams in 2002. What was the moment when you launched or after you launched that you really established what the purpose and the values of your company were going to be?
It just started to occur to us that the real world was sort of spare and boring, and that this alternate universe in these sound stages was just so animated and theatrical and romantic.
And a sense of narrative,
right?
Yes, exactly. I mean, when you work in that environment, there's a great sense of narrative. And you know, I think that a sense of storytelling, I mean, when you kind of now you engage with clients, and specifically clients that are focused on home, or here when we're making kind of objects or creating worlds for houses, everybody wants to tell their story.
Totally.
And their piece of, if it's your sofa, if it's your desk, that's just part of the kind of story and fabric of your life.
We can't forget one of the strangest things that anyone ever said to us in our life, and that was Ben Diller, who said, the set feels real and my house feels fake. Can you help me?
Okay.
And we went to his house, and his house was sort of fake. It had like styrofoam moldings, and everything was kind of false. And then the sets that we were building in the stages had more authenticity to their resonance to Ben. And we worked with him on quite a few projects after that. It was just such an inversion.
Totally.
It was such a strange moment.
And yet we all want to live in the world that feels full.
Yeah.
Yes, and so nice to kind of
exactly.
cut to now, because in some ways, I mean, that now is 20 years ago. And so that, I mean, that's about how old Roman & Williams will be 20 years old in 2 years. And so we felt, and starting the Guild for us, I think, was very much about taking what we recognized at that moment as sort of a formula for engaging people in a very kind of intimate dialogue about their spaces, and starting to create this synergy between artisans and objects and our own designs that told stories and also engaged then a sense of sort of different parts of the world. I mean, we traveled a lot. And that travel, I think, took us on a journey of wanting to kind of establish a really collected environment for spaces, even if, I mean, I guess compressed, right?
Totally.
Like compressing that formula a little bit in an amount of time for people who sort of wanted to jumpstart a living space and maybe didn't have the time, right? Like a lot of busy, I mean, there's really, you know, people who need to sort of start that foundation with things that we were discovering for them, and even ideas we were discovering for them in the furniture we were designing. And so that's what kind of brought us here.
Totally. Well, what that idea of that kind of the heartbeat or kind of the mission that drives all of the different pieces of your business, how do you express that in those different business avenues? What does that look like when you're working on a building versus designing a product versus creating a space like this? How does that manifest differently?
Well, that mission, you know, is like you said a moment ago, just that fullness of full life, right? It's filling in those, that any sign of emptiness to us needs to be filled. It needs to be, the existential void needs to be filled with some loving thing.
Yeah.
That's kind of our mission to a certain extent. I mean, I think as we evolve and as we get older and more experienced, I think we're learning sometimes to incorporate some emptiness and more emptiness in things. I think it's just a natural evolution of a designer. It's my kind of making fun of pseudo-Zen of the 90s was because I was pretty young in the 90s. And I was to tons of energy and wanted everything to be kind of like intense. And I think sometimes as you get older, I think you can deal with the sort of quietude of things. But getting back to your question, I think that mission to fill in the emptiness is across the board, whether it's a restaurant, a hotel, or a residence. That's to bring that residential kind of loving touch to every space.
But to think of the question of that of every part of our business, right? So if you look at sort of that fundamental mission, right? So if you're looking at a piece of furniture, or you're looking at a building, or you're looking at a space, right? An interior space, so someone's house or someone's living room, and we sort of travel between all those worlds. I think, again, fundamentally it's about activating them. It's about creating a sense of beauty and purpose in the pieces they collect, and a sense of, I think, longevity. I mean, what's always been very important to us is that people want to keep what we make for them. And so far, so good. Yeah. but you know, I mean, that sense that how do you create? I mean, you don't know, right? In your own lifetime, you don't know. So you have to say, okay, what's our sense of focus for creating? What's the recipe for creating a space or an object that has longevity?
And I think we were talking about this before too. It's about how you think about that object to get there.
Yes,
I feel like
it is.
Yeah.
It's about how, I mean, for us, how the object's made, what it's made of, you know, that it's details. And we were talking about this earlier, this sense of timelessness. Like, how do you define something that you can't timestamp? And we're interested in that, and it's tricky to do because you're in your own moment. You're in your own moment. You're like, oh, I like this, and you're influenced by things around you. But then we hope that we're playing the long game. You know.
Totally.
So you try to create things that have a frequency that people just won't get tired of right away. And we have this conversation a lot, and so I think that that's a fundamental. Like, what does beauty? What does quality mean? Over, you know, several generations.
Totally.
What makes things even collectible, right? Like, our spaces are pretty collected, right? We're interested in a level of material and detail that draws from a lot of different inspirations, a lot of different places, and a lot of different periods. And I mean, I guess I'll be so bold as to say I believe that is a formula to start to create a recipe that just gives somebody an opportunity to have objects and spaces that have memory and longevity. And that's been our goal, I think, since we started, because it does make people excited to be in them, because they have discovery.
You can't forget, too, the fundamental thing that as it grows older, this thing becomes, or this thing or this piece of architecture becomes more beautiful, as opposed to less beautiful. Because that's the goal for all of us as human beings. It's a goal for a chair. It's a goal for a watch.
That's right.
It's a goal technically for a pair of shoes, maybe not tennis shoes, but for, like, say, nice leather boots or something.
But
you
also
would think as they get older, they just become more luscious and more just gorgeous, you know?
Well, from a business perspective, right? So business of home, right? Okay. Because I'm just thinking, who's interviewing me, right? Okay. Well, so you know, obsolescence. I mean, disposability is just something economically that's been a formula for people to be successful. And has nothing to do with our fundamental sort of business plan. So you have to say, okay, it's about a repeat customer. It's about someone who's devoted to the brand and is going to keep something. Because when we make something, we want it to age well and be kept for a very long time. So then they have to keep coming back. So it's a different thing they're coming back for.
It's
a different dialogue. It's a different sort of economic methodology.
Totally.
And I mean, also, so far, so good. I mean, I think that there's a lot of people who judge value differently, I think. And I think in this moment, I think it's very intense where people put their money, where people put their attention, what they want to own,
Some
where they want
things
to be.
have more value because they're untouched. right?
Right.
An untouched
Oh,
or
so interesting.
unused thing, right? Never used. Amazing, right? But I think our ethos, right, would be that it had been used. There's pieces in the store, in the showroom here, that are being used, and but now some pieces are 2 years old in the room.
Yes.
And they're already just, the edges are getting rounded, and some
And
of
that's
the woods
better.
the colors are
Yes.
darkening. The leathers, these pale leathers are turning more caramel. And when I see one of the new pieces come out of the workshops, I'm like, shoot, it's not caramelized yet.
Can we break that in?
Like,
yeah.
maybe give it a year, give it 2 years.
Well, that's the thing also about, just the cycle. I think that when we, when we opened, now we're almost, like, I guess, just 3 years old,
Okay.
right? So we opened
December,
the shop in
December this year will be 3.
Yeah,
right?
so we've been designing furniture for a very long time together, and lighting, and so one of the things that we kind of had to investigate was how to kind of express to people how things age, right? So again, as Stephen was saying, having things in the shop and seeing them sort of mellow and weather, but we started to see people get really excited about that, and then also talking about the idea of home as being evergreen.
Yeah.
Right? Because people are like, well, home is following fashion. This is really in the last 3 years, this has been a very
The term
significant
evergreen, I
dialogue.
like that. That's
Well,
a
I
term
guess
for home.
evergreen meaning, well, look, fashion, I mean, you can even see in this kind of COVID moment, people are like, well, do we need to make a collection that often?
Yeah.
And with home,
Yeah.
so we opened, and people said, well, aren't you going to launch a new line? I said, well,
Tell us what's
we've
new.
been together for almost like 25 years. I said, these 60 pieces, I said, are like a lifelong pursuit for us.
Yeah.
Like, let's live with them for a minute. And now this year, we're going to launch a few new things. But so to us, that comes in, again, a longer game, a lower frequency, a different cycle. And I think that now, I have to say really proudly, I think there's a real conversation about that in the media, in the world.
So do you feel like the world is catching up a little bit in terms of?
Well, that sounds like kind of like that's intense to say, but yes.
Well, yeah. So I think when I flick through or digitally flick through magazines and things like that, I see more work that's more layered than ever before. Really well done, detailed work that looks like the designers researched them a little carefully, but also you see some free jazz, meaning with historical elements that the person's skillfully playing with different eras. I see more and more of that. I just love it. To me, it gets, again, it's eliminating that sort of hyper beige stainless steel world, which I think is just so cold. And there's still quite a bit of that. Even if it was a height of it with the 90s, it's nowhere near
Not gone
dead.
yet.
Because
Well,
I even driving around the city right now today, I saw some of the new NYU buildings going up, and I'm just like, they're just like frozen, kind of. They just there's no warmth to some of these new buildings.
One of the things you said was about building something that gets better with age. What is the mindset you're in to create something that is both beautiful now and more beautiful later?
Well, number one is with the assembly of things, whether it's architecture or furniture or interiors, it's repairable, right? It means it can be taken apart and repaired. It's not glued together in a way that it never can be removed, like say an iPhone cover, right? It's not very easily repairable, right? It should have 4 screws on it that come off, and you put the new piece of glass on it. But that works with architecture and interiors, where someone says, "Oh, my chair is ruined," but it's absolutely not ruined. You take it, you operate on it, you remove everything, you put the new piece on, and I tell you, pretty much everyone would get that chair back and have a closer relationship with it, knowing that it went through some almost war of whether it's a stain or a rip or a chip. I think that those battle scars or those wounds become stories, and even if they're make a person scared or intimidated as they're happening, I mark my words, though, the relationship with it will get deeper. And I think ultimately, as that happens over and over with multiple objects in your life, you just end up with a deeper sense of contentment and in some ways attachment to the things around you, which I don't think is a dirty word, attachment.
No, I mean, I think for us, you asked about values and even our manifesto and our mission, expressing attachments. That's what Stephen's talking about. So if it's in an inanimate object, but even in the sense of, being attached to your life, being attached to your partner, being attached to what you own. And if you look
you can be attached to a sofa. It's totally safe.
totally.
It's okay
But if you look at brands, like Hermes or Cartier, brands that part of what they talk about a lot, because they've been around a long time, and is they will bring something back that your grandfather bought, like 80 years ago, and will repair it. And just that promise really resonates with us. Like I just want to believe in that kind of reliability of the things we make.
Yeah.
And so that is sort of decidedly different than a lot of the past 20 to 25 years where brands were really, as I said, their focus was, I think, how they kind of continue catching up with trends and releasing new things.
Totally.
And look, the economics of what we're talking about are tricky because people will come and say, well, why can I buy like silverware or a sofa for $2,500? I'm like, well, because the people making it aren't being paid well, because the materials that it's being made with are not reliable. And so it's just something that if you dig a little deeper, you're going to find don't have the kind of credibility that we want to provide. But it's hard to explain that when there's other people in the marketplace that it's like, and I don't love to use the word luxury, but I mean in this kind of an elevated environment where people have to have the means to buy these things, we really think that if you've made it to that place and you've earned that in your life, your object, your sofa, your table should have real value.
One thing I had wanted to ask the two of you about is that sense of value that's in all of the pieces and in what you create. But you also have to balance that with the business piece. The way you said that the business is tricky, the margin, the revenue. How do you make sure that when you're chasing one of those things, whether it's the revenue or kind of the heart and soul, how do you hold on to both at the same time?
We try to be rational about it. This is relatively new for us. I think we're actually pretty skilled at retail. I think I'm surprised how you're especially good at it. It's amazing. But our whole scenario business-wise is, I kind of think of sports sometimes. We're not trying to sell something for an extremely high price that we build for a really low price, right? I think sometimes capitalism is basically that, right?
Yeah.
You sell for as much as you can and make it for as little as you can. We're bringing those two pieces closer together. Sports-wise, it kind of equates to, in football, like it's a running game more than a flamboyant passing game. Or baseball, it's a guy who hits base hits all the time as opposed to home runs every once in a while, blows out his arm because he's trying too hard. I think American business typically has followed that home run kind of style, right?
Yeah.
Like my margins are 180% on that chair, and I just think that leads to these disposable type of items. So we're flirting with a recipe that's mildly dangerous, but we're passionate about it, and we have partners. And Robin's just her natural skill with the whole relationship with sales and my skills with the builders. We're just doing our best to I guess make it a leaner machine, not such a fat machine.
Yeah.
And about devotion and loyalty, right? We're obsessed with these, British bootmakers who, people keep the shoes for 80 years, but then they buy like 30 pairs. They are devoted to only wearing them. So if you use that as kind of a model of like object lust, there's something really powerful about that to us. Stephen and I can't sort of stop sort of trying to improve it, tinkering it, keep experimenting to kind of refine that. So when you talk about it, whether it's dealing with a margin or dealing with how to make a sofa that can reach a reasonable margin, but still is really well made. We're having that conversation now about a chair. He's making the prototype, and we're just trying to refine it because there's a lot of wood in the back piece, and we're like, okay, how do we skinny it down without it losing its fundamental beauty and soul, and you have to. So we really get into the depth of these conversations, and that is an iterative process. And then you can hit the sweet spot.
Yeah.
right? But it takes a lot of concentration, and it's just not fast.
So how do you know when you've hit that moment where you have the balance right?
Oh, that's a good question.
Of an object and business-wise and creative-wise, you mean? Where
Yeah,
it's just
I
kind
think
of
so.
humming
Yeah,
along?
I'm thinking of that chair as an example. You know,
Yes.
what will the moment be when you've hit
I
that
think it's
right?
the customers loving it. Like, look, I mean, I don't like, we could pan up, but these lights, these Oscar lights, that's like the customers love it. Like when we made that light, we didn't know, do you know what I mean? Like there would be that adoration.
Yeah.
And then as that happened, we started to sell them more. So we started to think,
Yeah,
how
yeah,
do
so-
we
so-
refine the
yeah.
details? Do you know what I mean?
That's
Like how do
exactly
we
right.
break the stem down to make it more efficient to
I mean,
ship?
ultimately, what we're doing is every piece of furniture, even architecture for us, is a sort of lure. It's like an elaborate fishing lure
Yes.
that we're working on with string and tying and making these wings on it, and spending hours and hours, and weeks on these things. But until that fish just embraces it,
Yes,
as the customer,
exactly.
then we know it's been successful, right? If people are like that piece is so intimidating or heavy, you know, we love it. We love a lot of heavy, intimidating things. We have no fear of the biggest, most intense thing in the world. It totally makes us happy. But sometimes I think it's just too much for people. But our goal is ultimately is to see something really enjoyed and embraced by, in general, people or customers. Then we know it works. And of course, margin-wise, it has to try to get someplace reasonable, like 60, 65% margin would be ideal, as opposed to some pieces that could be dangerously
Yeah.
40.
We have a range.
Ultimately, our goal too is, I think, as we keep doing this, is to we'll have products here that are pretty extraordinary, price-wise and construction-wise, but some more entry-level pieces that are relatively easy to build, still substantial and beefy.
Yeah.
But we keep the manufacturing to a minimum, meaning it's a very frank, simplistic piece of furniture, so that they're more entry level, and people can kind of enjoy the heft and maybe the magical quality of this.
And the art and the,
large piece
like,
of
you know, these
furniture.
artisans we embrace. So we make some accessories, we make all the furniture and lighting, but see, like, and I'm just going to go back a second. In our spaces, like when someone adores a restaurant that we make, when someone adores light, you know, that relationship, I think, with people is really important to us. Like we deal in inanimate spaces and objects, but they only come to light and to life when they're enjoyed.
Yeah.
You know, when they're really, and when you get a lot of adoration, you know, then you're having a dialogue, right, with the public. I mean, and people, they send us pictures of the objects in their homes. It's a beautiful thing.
COVID has obviously changed the way we interact with the world. How does that way of thinking and how do those values translate then when you can't be in a space, when you have limited access to experiences, and when your work is seen more virtually?
Well, I love that you're asking that, because that has been, listen, we've never, it's been a few years, but even at Roman Williams, like we've never really focused on the digital space a lot. It was always like a sort of a sidebar. And now, I mean, COVID really, especially with a retail brand, you have to embrace it. So we really have, but we have this really incredible sales staff that's really been with us since the beginning. And so we've really tried to create this private virtual experience with them. And then we started to realize how much people don't want to be only transactional on web. I mean, it's not like just, I mean, the common thinking is you click and you buy, right? Like Amazon, okay, I've got it, like it showed up good. And I'm finding here that people really want the communication. They want how much water fits in the teapot, tell me about the glaze, and then we're realizing that people love Roman Williams and the Guild like all around the world. And so wait a minute, you know, they can't all come to the store. So we were a little limited in that thinking. And in some ways, COVID has really opened us up because people are shopping everywhere. Sales staff is talking to people everywhere. And so that's been like kind of a gift of discovery about this virtual world.
I think we've done a pretty good job too of our website from the beginning, you know, just keeping it juicy and layered and beautiful. And our, you know, Adrian Go, who shoots a lot of everything for us, a close friend and just an amazing photographer who's been with us since we started too, is just the consistency of his photography and the beauty of it, even as his work slowly evolves.
Yeah, we're all growing together.
It's a little more maybe romantic slowly, Adrian.
I think so.
Sense that, right? His wife works with us too, Akari. And
Yeah, she's our style director. It's really a family affair.
And so I just think there's so much care. Like, for example, we send a box of blue pieces of pottery to Adrian's house in the springs out east. And he sets them all around his pool, and they fetch fruits and vegetables around them. They probably have lunch. They probably eat out of it.
I think we sent you that, right? We just launched a collection.
We get back, we see all these gorgeous photographs from their day that they had with the pieces, and we put them up, and I think it's contagious. And people see the pictures, and maybe I'm being optimistic, but I feel like there's something magical about it, maybe because it wasn't staged, and it wasn't just another hired person delegated to take care of some task that this, for Adrian,
exactly.
I think it's an act of love too, to a certain extent.
Agreed.
And I think Akari and everybody here working on it,
Where do you go from here? As you fold all of these principles into the online, into the retail store, into all the pieces of your business, what?
We want to warm the earth. No, I mean, we do.
I was fantasizing that I'd love to evolve the Guild into some sort of creative retreat where it was like a hotel. But I get bored in hotels. If I go to a hotel for 3 or 4 days, I just get so bored, I'm going to die. Like, not cooking, not making
Steven's
anything,
an awesome
not painting,
cook,
not drawing. I'm just stuck in this hotel. It'd be a retreat, a creative retreat, like a Guild retreat that would be a gorgeous hotel that you could rest at. But then someone could also build there. There'd be wood shops. They could paint. They could cook. They could do all these creative endeavors with these amazing people. Get their hands dirty and still sit by a pool if they want. They don't have to do the dishes if they cook. Maybe some luxurious form of creativity to lure people into that animated, creative life.
But like luxury is active, right? Where it's about engaging in creativity is luxury. It's opposed to someone always serving you.
Yeah.
Like we're interested in being like involved in the process, right? Like viscerally involved, and that's so counter. People are like, "Oh, why would I want to go somewhere and cook?" It's like because it's wonderful and a creative experience and elevating, and that's not maybe. That's next.
Yeah.
I don't know if people have gotten to that yet, but that's the idea.
We're still working on quite a few hotels, and I'm always trying to add a wood shop someplace else, and they're just like, "What? Why are you doing that? What? Who would use that?" But they just don't know because that's the future.
I say they're going to listen to this.
Yeah.
And now you're going to have a wood shop in all of those hotels.
Yeah. Pottery shop.
Well, thank you so much for having us today. It's been wonderful to chat with you.
So nice to see
Fun
you
to talk.
again.
Fun to break through our COVID, not face to face.
Yes.
Talking.
Dennis, back to you. Thank you so much.